I went back and restructured. If I could do it all over again, how would I do it different? And one of the rules I put in place is I wouldn't use anybody else's money. I wouldn't have anybody else control my equity. I was very fortunate. I grew up kind of truly the rich dad, poor dad life. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old, and I moved from Oregon to Minneapolis and grew up with my mom and my stepdad, and he was an entrepreneur. He founded his company in the late 60s, and by the time I moved in with him in 1976, he was maybe doing $500,000 in revenue, and by the time I left, my parents got divorced in 1995. By the time I left in 95, the business was $350 million in revenue. So I got to watch it grow from startup to a sizable company. Today, it's still $1.2 billion. But I went back and lived with my dad and stepmom all through high school, junior high and high school back in Oregon. And they were just a family with trying to raise 5 kids and put them through school. And I had to work, I always had to work. There's one thing growing up is both sides of parents. If you wanted money or if you had time, you needed to be working. So the work ethic was something that I'm so appreciative that I got as a kid growing up. When I graduated high school, I moved to Atlanta from Oregon and became an outside sales rep. And I traveled 11 states and became really independent, And so in 1995, when I decided to leave that business after being the director of U.S. sales in Minnesota, I wanted to go out and start my own company. And so I had a newborn and a 2.5-year-old. I walked away from a job where I was making $150,000 a year at 26 years old, running a sales team of 28 people, and really just decided it was time for me to do my own thing. And so I saw an opportunity where business owners were ending their life cycle. They weren't selling their businesses. They were basically just shutting them down because there was no buyers for their businesses. They were in the medical space. And so I just started going out and talking to business owners saying, hey, if you're thinking about shutting your business down, instead of shutting it down and making no money, why don't you sell it to me and I'll pay you over 3 to 5 years and I'll run it. And so I made, 100 of those presentations. I finally found somebody to say yes. And I parlayed that between 27 years old and 29 years old into having 4 equity rounds. I raised $1 million, then $6 million, then $18 million, and then $10 million. Took the company public. I was one of the youngest guys to ring the opening bell of the American Stock Exchange at 29 years old, and really thought I had the world. I'm a 2.4 GPA high schooler, barely got out of high school, and yet here I'm running a public company, going to New York, holding lunches on the 88th floor of the World Trade Center with Smith Barney and Salomon Brothers and Goldman Sachs, and all this before even 30 years old. Really thought I was just on fire, only to wake up at 32 years old and have my private equity group call a meeting in New York and say, great job, we're selling the business, and thanks for all the hard work. And I said, nah, you can't be selling the business because we're just getting started. And they said, you and every other CEO, so we're going to introduce you to a new boss. He's in the next room. And they kicked me to chairman, and he put the company up for sale immediately. So I left to try to buy my company back, and that happened in 2001 and 2002. So when I left the business in 2002 and tried to buy it back, they sold to an international company. I was angry. I'd started that thing from scratch. We were going to be highly profitable and do like 75, 80 million in revenue. And they sold it to an Italian firm. I spent the next, year and a half kind of moaning about how they screwed me over. And one of my good buddies said, hey, you got to go back and identify what you did great. You have to own all your bad choices. It basically caused you giving your company away, like needing other people's capital. And, when you use other people's money, they get to pull the trigger and make decisions. So I went back and restructured. If I could do it all over again, how would I do it different? And one of the rules I put in place is I wouldn't use anybody else's money. I wouldn't have anybody else control my equity. And then I wrote down all the things I'd want to do that were positive and impactful. And I relaunched that business that I created in June of 2005. It was called Audigy, with a simple premise. Instead of me buying the businesses or franchising the businesses and then cramming down on you and telling you what to do as an employee, how about I give you equity in my management company and I work for you and I build the resources you'll never have in your small business? And so everyone told me it's not going to work. I'm crazy. I launched that business June of 2005 using the things that I did well and making sure I didn't repeat any of the mistakes, with the idea that if I could figure it out in that business, I could figure it out for every small business. So that business I launched in 2005, built it 100% organically, Sold it in 2016 for 77 times EBITDA, 150 million to $1 billion company. Deployed what I had built into 8 countries for that $1 billion company, and in 36 months they were worth $4.5 billion. So I exited that, and then I partnered with Grant Cardone. My wife and I partnered with Grant Cardone, and I brought all those programs and processes and technology and everything I built, along with all the research I did from 2009 to 2019 with FTI out of Chicago and IGS out of Boston, shaking down 4,000 different businesses to understand where they break, where they succeed, what the differentials are across 10 elements: strategy, marketing, sales, operations, people, leadership, finance, data, technology, and investment thesis, so that I could create a algorithmic pattern for growing and scaling businesses from scratch without the need for other people's money. And that's what I presented to Grant in 2019. And between 2019 and today, we now have an enterprise value in the new business. It's our 4th year in business. It's worth about $600 million. We manage $1.8 billion in businesses. And it's just unbelievably exciting what we're able to do to help people and the relationships we're building.